there are four different audiences you have to think about.
Right.
One is the super committed, the activists, the one who make their life cycle choices all about protecting the environment and helping people come out of poverty and ending war and all the rest of it. So you've got your superconductors, so to speak, and for them you lead with it.
Right.
Then you've got what I call the lazy greens, like my mother-in-law. I told her I was coming to stay at her house in Queens because I was going to tour the Marcal plant. This is quite a few years ago. And she says, "Are you always buy Marcal because it's recycled?" Well, she always buys Marcal because it's recycled and it's right next to the Scott and the other brands on the shelf in the supermarket she's already going to.
Yeah.
So that's a lazy green. Okay. Then you've got the basically uncommitted, and then you've got the hostile. So to the uncommitted and the hostile, you have to emphasize why the product is intrinsically better. And the green stuff comes along for a ride. This is the softest toilet paper you will ever use. And the reason is because we don't use chlorine bleach, we use peroxide, which is much gentler. This amazing solar panel is going to reduce your energy costs by X dollars a month, and it has no moving parts, so it's really quiet. Just stress the benefit. This is the most comfortable mattress you'll have ever slept on because we use only natural merino wool, whatever it is.
Right.
And every company will be able to have for every product some points of differentiation. And just like you would not put the same ad in the National Enquirer and the New Yorker, you don't put the same marketing message out to the deep greens and the anti-greens. The people for whom climate change is this mythical negative beast is the climate crisis, rather. They're not going to buy on the basis of this is greener. They hate green. They want to drive their SUV a quarter mile to the supermarket to buy their cigarettes and pollute, and they're not going to take any message about going green as any reason to do anything except avoiding you.
Yeah.
But whatever, if they have health issues and your product helps with that because it's not using harsh chemicals, if they have a child with an illness and they want to be concerned about how best to treat those are many, many paths into the natural products world. And so you hit them on those points.
You are listening to Power Marketing with Kevin Lee. Kevin and his agency Did It have helped thousands of businesses win through superior marketing, as have his books, articles, speaking engagements, and the E-Marketing Association Power Marketing Podcasts. Here's Kevin.
I'm super excited to talk to Shel Horowitz today because he sort of bridges the areas of entrepreneurship and social impact in really interesting ways. And Shel, you describe yourself as a transferpreneur. So I want you to go a little deeper on sort of what is that exactly in comparison to an intrapreneur or an entrepreneur, both of which have already been coined.
Right. Well, obviously, transformpreneur is a hybrid of transformation and entrepreneur. So I help businesses to transform from being your typical business focused only on the things that a typical business focuses on to businesses that are focusing on transforming the world. Businesses that have a built-in DNA that tilts them towards social equity, environmental justice, those sorts of things. And it's really exciting. I've been doing this work for more than 20 years now after being in business another 20 years before that. And it's just so wonderful to think about business as a lever for social change and environmental progress. It's such a construct that we don't think about. And yet, interestingly enough, Kevin, over and over again, the businesses that are going into this, they are more resilient. They're often more profitable. They have lower expenses. They have higher customer loyalty, higher employee loyalty. It's just a long list of benefits. And they're doing good in the world. They don't have to explain to their grandkids why they unleashed some sort of corporate headache on the rest of us.
Right. Right. Well, that's a valiant mission to be on and to help the companies transform themselves in that way. What I find fascinating is that, particularly at the larger companies, you tend to have these independent silos, all of whom sort of overlap from a sort of that kind of a mission. You've got corporate philanthropy, you've got corporate social responsibility, you've got cause marketing sometimes, right? And then you've got sort of internal volunteerism efforts, or sort of engaging the employees in some kind of social impact or social good. But yet it's really rare for an organization to sort of think that through holistically, right? They tend to sort of silo these out, and there's sort of somebody internally in charge of each one of those things, right?
Yeah,
And
they
do you
don't
get
always
a
talk to
sense?
each other. Yeah, go
Do you
ahead.
get a sense of are some companies starting to really sort of centralize this idea of, we are, stewards of the world, right? Of making sure we don't do evil, but also potentially do good. And so, is this starting to be centralized in some way, or is that part of your challenge, is that you sort of have to, you know, help these companies think through what are all the ways in which we can deliver social impact in a positive way?
Mhm. Well, it's not a one-shot answer because it's going to differ widely depending on who you're talking to. What's interesting to me is that all the Fortune 500 companies these days, they have at least a sustainability coordinator and maybe a sustainability department. They
Mhm.
have their philanthropy, they have all those different pieces you talk about. My clientele tends to be the much, much smaller businesses, the 1 to 50 employee
Mm.
framework. And actually, just the morning that we're recording this, I happen to have had breakfast with a man named Dean Sycon, who for 30 years was the CEO of a company called Dean's Beans, a coffee company that from day one in, I think, 1994 was organic and fair trade 100%, not like the 3% that the Green Mountains and the Starbucks of the world give us in sustainable coffee. So, and the reason he's not the CEO anymore is that he gave the company to his employees and retired to go be a book writer. And so, um, he's somebody who I have enormous respect for. I've known him for many years. And among other things, he was offered the contract to be the exclusive supplier of coffee to Keurig when Keurig first came out. And he turned it down because there was too much plastic waste involved. So this is a man with very high ethical standards and ran a very, very successful business, did all sorts of really interesting things, and he wore all of those hats. So on the philanthropy side, he of course had his own giving program, but he also worked with local hospitals and schools to private label his coffee as fundraisers. So, like, you can go to the gift shop at our local hospital, the Cooley Dickinson Hospital, and buy a bag of Way Cooley coffee. And the portion that would normally go to the business is instead going to fund the hospital. So it's tremendous. And he also, one of the other things I love about him is every place that he was sourcing coffee, he would give money to village-led projects that he would fund and they would run. So not great white father coming in here, but just providing the capital to make it happen with their own initiative, their own brain power, and of course, consulting help when needed. And there have been amazing things that he's done in places like Rwanda or Guatemala, Ethiopia. And so that's a model for a really successful business on a small scale. I have not really a clear idea of how many employees they are, but I'm guessing it's somewhere in the 50 to 100 range.
Right, right.
And it's proof. And then on the other end of the scale, you see initiatives like the Prius. Who would have guessed that Prius would become a cool, hip car? I mean, weird looking hatchback, economy car, and all of a sudden everybody wants one. But the mission driven piece of that, the idea of polluting less, was very, very attractive to people in my demographic, um, old hippies. And and the car was not like a Tesla costing when the Teslas first came out upwards of 100K. It was an affordable car, and it caught on. Now there are some definite issues with electric cars in general and hybrids especially, but it is a step in the right direction. And we see then the innovation, the really incredible thinking that's going on out there in the fringes where people aren't looking. such as I'm a great fan, and I talk about him in this is my latest of 4 books on environmental and socially conscious business, Guerrilla Marketing to Heal the World, that I co-authored nominally with the late J. Conrad Levinson. And one of the people I profiled in this book is a guy named Amory Lovins, founder of the Rocky Mountain Institute. Now, Amory lives just outside of Aspen, Colorado, which is famous for
Aspen, I guess skiing.
yes. What do you need for skiing?
Skis,
And what does the skis go on?
ski boots, and
The other side, the
clothing,
bottom
and
side.
what's
What's
that?
what's underneath the ski? The bottom side of the ski.
Oh, the snow.
Snow. Yes. What do you need for snow? You need cold.
Yeah,
So here he is in Aspen, Colorado, in a place whose entire economy revolves around it being unpleasantly cold.
right.
And he lives in a house that doesn't have a furnace and doesn't need one. It is so warm in that house that he can grow bananas in Aspen, Colorado, in a house with no furnace. So he built basically what we now call a net zero house in 1984. So if that had become the norm, and actually in your neighborhood, he was involved in a retrofit of your very tall neighbor, the Empire State Building. And that was another amazing project. But if housing norms had taken off from what he developed in 1984, we wouldn't have gone to war in Iraq. The Russians probably wouldn't be fighting over Ukraine right now. I mean, really major things would have happened, and of course, our air would be a whole lot cleaner. So the Empire State Building was not a cheap project. It was, I believe, $13 million for the first phase, but the immediate savings were 3.3 million a year, and this is like 20 years ago. So right now, that would be a much, much larger number. So for the first 3 years, it was paying it back, and then after that, it was just saving the money. So if you're going to save $3 million or probably by now 5 million every year just by doing something like that,
Hmm.
why wouldn't you? There's no business case for not doing it.
Right.
There are very few business investments that have a 3-year payback.
Yeah, absolutely. One thing I'd love to get into a little bit is, obviously, lots and lots of research shows that consumers, in the case of breaking a tie between two brands, will sometimes use this sort of social impact footprint that
Mhm.
the brand has as the tiebreaker. Like, is there a purpose? Is their mission, align with the interests of the consumer? But
I'd even say
seeing that data,
not only just sometimes, but lots of times. Every
yeah, yeah.
study I've seen has shown that
So of
this is a
course,
very powerful.
yeah, brands have seen those studies, right? And then they may come to you or somebody like you, and they just want to put a band-aid on their brand, right? And they're not actually fully behind it, but they're like, oh, well, we're probably losing out in the head-to-head against our more socially, aware competitor. How do we like put a band-aid on our brand so that we can resuscitate, like steal back that share, right? Versus an authentic, C-suite driven, integrated perspective. Like, so how do you then take their enthusiasm, which is really sort of a fake enthusiasm, how do you transform that into like an authentic enthusiasm where they really do remake their business?
Yeah, well, there is a term for what you just described, and it's called greenwashing.
Right.
And there are a lot of companies. I mean, the entire nuclear power industry is built on greenwashing. There is nothing green about nuclear power. I wrote a book about that back in, it was published in 1980. I wrote it in 1979. And I updated it after the Fukushima accident in 2011 for a Japanese edition. And I don't know why they wanted to bring back a book from 1980, but they did. And so I wrote a short update to it, and I found nothing to change my mind. I've actually been involved on the activist side of my life in resuscitating the Clamshell Alliance, which was a major safe energy anti-nuke group in the 1970s. So the best way to combat greenwashing is to make, I think, the bottom line business case for why to do it right in the first place. That, I mean, you look at a company, okay, Walmart. Let's look at Walmart for a minute. Walmart, people are shocked to learn, is a very green company, and Walmart is about as far from tree huggers as you can get. Walmart is all about profit, but they found that it was enormously profitable to do the right thing. So they have greened their supply chain, greened their transportation, greened their warehouses, green who they're buying from to sell end use products. I mean, The last time I checked, Walmart was actually selling more organic food than Whole Foods was. And the really interesting thing is they're selling it to people who have never been to a Whole Foods and never will go to a Whole Foods. Whole Foods
Right.
is not their demographic.
Yeah.
And so they are, if you can get a truck driver in Mississippi to go buy organic food because maybe they're having issues with one of their bodily organs and they want to get better, that's fine. Let Walmart make that profit on that because they are authentically catering to the working class person who wants something different. They are selling enormous numbers of low energy light bulbs. They are not doing this to be nice. They are doing it to make money. But in the course, they discovered that greenwashing is not really a good solution. It's better to just do it right and be able to have those numbers. And oh my goodness, what they save on fuel costs, what they save just waste disposal. I believe that they actually mandate changes in packaging. So you could buy, like at least 10 years ago, this was true. You would buy the same thing in a Target and a Walmart, and it would have 3 times as much packaging from the Target. Because Walmart just basically said, if you want to sell through us, you're not going to do it that way.
Right.
So I have enormous respect for that. And that is, again, a bottom line business decision. It has nothing to do with the tree huggers.
Yeah. Yeah. No, what I love about that is the bigger players have the ability to mandate that change and it can have a ripple effect.
Yeah.
Right.
And
Because,
so, ironically enough, a company that I don't even shop at because I have some serious issues with, among other things, their labor practices, their store siting practices, and other things, has done more to green the economy than all of my consulting and writing and speaking will ever do because they have that leverage and I don't.
right.
But I have the platform to show what they're doing and show why it's a good thing and show why more businesses could be like that. A few years ago, I went to something called the Responsible Business Summit, and it was all Fortune 100 companies. It was all the speakers were brands we know. And it was really very nice on one level to see that, yes, this has become mainstream, that the Coca-Colas and Pirellis and General Motors of the world are taking this stuff seriously. And that's because of the work of us out there on the fringes for 40 years before that. And I like to think that I had at least a little bit to do with that transformation. But the market demands it. I mean, again, if you're looking at 2 different chocolate bars on the shelf and one says fair trade and you have any understanding of what that means and that you know that the one that doesn't say fair trade is probably using child slave labor in someplace like the Ivory Coast or Ghana, which one are you going to buy? Your $3 is going to go for the ethical one.
Yep. Yep.
But people do need to make sure that they understand what the labels mean. Like you walk into a health food store and it says natural. Well, natural has no legal meaning. Organic has a legal meaning. Organic means it was not GMO and grown without chemical, what I call chemiculture. So
Right.
that's a good certification. But natural doesn't mean anything. And the best fair trade certifications are something that means something. And then there are others that really don't.
Yeah.
So you do have to be an educated consumer. Fortunately, we all have these magical things now that even in a supermarket, you can pull it up and say, what does that certification mean? You can take a photo of it and send it to Google Lens. And in about 25 seconds, you'll know what that certification means.
Yeah. Yeah. And the next generation of that is even more powerful because the Gemini is rolled out within Google, and of course you've got Bing and ChatGPT having given access to even more information. And there are still the hallucinations in the AI side where sometimes it gets it wrong. But for the having that information frictionlessly available at one's fingertips is super exciting. To your point about sort of the marketing and in some cases certain terminology either not necessarily meaning something or it doesn't mean as much as people think it means, right? And we've seen on YouTube, for example, that people sometimes don't understand the difference between cage-free and free-range eggs from the chicken, right? And how one of those is really not as meaningful as you think it might be, right? Yeah. When you see it on the package.
And let me tell you, one of the things that's going to really move that particular piece of the movement along is when people start tasting a real egg. I mean, I live on a dairy farm. My neighbors had chickens for a while. Oh my goodness, those eggs were amazing. And I would see the chickens, they were free range. I kept waiting for one of them to ring my bell and saying, this letter came to us instead of you. And I did have to kind of duck around at one point, some piles of chicken droppings on my lawn. The eggs were good enough that I would put up with the chicken poop. Um,
Right.
and it just, you can't go back to eat a factory egg after you've tried a real egg. It's not the same experience at all.
Yeah.
And it's amazing. And we're seeing more and more that the quality of the better social and environmental products are better than the quality of the chemiculture, agriculture, mainstream stuff that has no flavor and no nutrition. And you're another brand I like to talk about is very close to you geographically, and that's Marcal, the paper products company. They're right across the river from you in Paramus, and they they're really interesting because they went to recycled really, really early. They went to recycled when I was -6, 1950.
Wow.
Yeah. And they didn't tell anybody. They didn't tell anybody. They kind of thought the reaction would be, ew, you're making toilet paper out of our old junk mail? Eh. But by about, I'd say 1975, 1979, it would have made sense to start talking about that.
Yeah.
And they still didn't. And they waited until they actually went bankrupt and brought in a turnaround specialist. I think his name was Tim Spring. And he's like, wow, this is a huge asset. We have a 50-year advantage over anybody else in going recycled. Let's milk that. So they reinvented themselves as this very green company that's going to save 1 million trees through their toilet paper. And boom, not only were they out of bankruptcy, but even though they're a regional brand outside of the Northeast, you really don't see Markel past DC. They became the largest selling recycled household paper products brand, larger than, say, Seventh Generation, which did all of the right branding, but just doesn't have the supermarket space. And that's another point I want to make, is that when you go after not just the very green consumer, but the mainstream consumer with green products and services, and you have to do this differently from how you reach the very green and very socially conscious, the activist group, what they call conscious creatives. You reach them with messages that are really about their self-interest, as I'm trying to do with the business community, and showing how it is in their self-interest to create and market truly green products and to have truly social equity components to their business. At one point, doing an interview like this, the host asked me, well, this is all very well and good. What would you do for a pizza shop owner? And I had, of course, given this exactly zero thought ahead of time. It was a surprise question. So I said, well, if I were a pizza shop owner, I would go into a local high school and recruit a crew that I could train to grow organic tomatoes and garlic and onions, and that I could train some other kids to like bake the pizzas and then sell the pizzas on a Friday for delivery on Monday or Tuesday when your business is dead otherwise. Pre-sold pizzas, all organic, natural pizzas made by your classmates. Really a nice alternative to the really gross-looking turkey tetrazzini in the cafeteria steam tray. So, it's multiple benefits, it's systems thinking, and I think it really changed the world. And I mentioned the wars that are all around us lately, some time back in this conversation. And I think one of the other things that people don't realize is that most wars, when you boil it down, when you scrape away all the wrapping paper that looks like ethnic conflict, it's all about resources. Somebody wants something that somebody else has, whether it's land or oil or water or whatever it is. That's what most wars are about. And then they wrap it up in the ethnic and religious conflict to make it more accessible to the base of people they're trying to motivate. But it's really all about who controls what and who's in the way. So doing this as a lever not only toward a cleaner environment, but also toward peace is something very exciting to me. I have been both an activist and a marketer since my teens. Actually became an activist 3 months before I turned 13. So I technically wasn't even a teen yet. But, it's just seeing that bigger picture and helping people unpack that, I think is a real strength that I offer. And actually, I'm going to be launching in April a 5-week mastermind that people can explore how their own particular organization can really go deep on this. And it's a very limited, I'm closing it out at 8 people. So somewhere between 4 and 8 people. And I will just give you the URL for that, tinyurl.com/5 spelled out, FIVE, weeks, one word. So tinyurl.com/5 weeks with the 5 as a word.
Great. So a follow-up question on that is you've used a few examples of brands that are doing it purely for business reasons or did it for business reasons and then sort of, either discovered the marketing later or really don't focus on like marketing out their, that social impact element because it's intrinsic to their production process or whatever. But when a brand, has made moves in the direction where they maybe have a differentiator that is a green differentiator or some other positive social impact variable, how do you recommend that the brand managers and the agencies think through, well, do we lead with the fact that it's actually recycled paper pulp that's touching your butt? Or do we actually have it come along for the ride, right? Because you have to sort of decide in the list of sort of benefits to the product or in the problems that it solves, there might be this green element or there might be the social impact element, but you can lead with it like Seventh Generation sort of does. They tend to really lead with that, or you can have it sort of come along for the ride as like, oh, by the way, not only is it great, not only is it wonderful, not only is it inexpensive, but it also has this, right?
Yeah.
And you have to think that through from a positioning perspective. So how do you help the marketing teams decide? Like, do you lead with that element of the business, or do you have it be sort of a tiebreaker by the way?
The answer is yes, and how you answer specifically depends on who you're talking to, because there are 4 different audiences you have to think about.
Right.
One is the super committed, the activists, the one who make their life cycle choices all about protecting the environment and helping people come out of poverty and ending war and all the rest of it. So you've got your superconductors, so to speak, and for them you lead with it.
Right.
Then you've got what I call the lazy greens, like my mother-in-law. I told her I was coming to stay in her house in Queens because I was going to tour the Marcal plant. This is quite a few years ago. And she says, "I always buy Marcal because it's recycled." Well, she always buys Marcal because it's recycled and it's right next to the Scott and the other brands on the shelf in the supermarket she's already going to.
Yeah.
So that's a lazy green. Okay, then you've got the basically uncommitted, and then you've got the hostile. So to the uncommitted and the hostile, you have to emphasize why the product is intrinsically better. And the green stuff comes along for a ride. This is the softest toilet paper you will ever use, and the reason is because we don't use chlorine bleach, we use peroxide, which is much gentler. This amazing solar panel is going to reduce your energy costs by X dollars a month, and it has no moving parts, so it's really quiet. Just stress the benefit. This is the most comfortable mattress you'll have ever slept on because we use only natural merino wool, whatever it is.
Right.
And every company will be able to have for every product some points of differentiation. And just like you would not put the same ad in the National Enquirer and the New Yorker, you don't put the same marketing message out to the deep greens and the anti-greens. The people for whom climate change is this mythical negative beast is the climate crisis, rather. They're not going to buy on the basis of this is greener. They hate green. They want to drive their SUV a quarter mile to the supermarket to buy their cigarettes and pollute, and they're not going to take any message about going green as any reason to do anything except avoiding you.
Yeah.
But whatever, if they have health issues and your product helps with that because it's not using harsh chemicals, if they have a child with an illness and they want to be concerned about how best to treat those are many, many paths into the natural products world. And so you hit them on those points and you figure that eventually you'll educate them to the point where maybe they'll move from being an anti to a non. And then maybe another 5 years in, they'll move from a non to a lazy. And then, wow, all of a sudden they're a climate activist.
That'd be quite the journey.
Well taking it though. I mean, I was deeply moved to see an interview with an ex-Nazi skinhead who now goes about peace building interracially in the Deep South.
Mhm.
And he knows how to talk to those people because he was one of those people.
Right. Right. Yeah, you do certainly see those examples occasionally sort of pop up of the folks who've gone through that journey, and you can think about all these various causes where you'll see some people, there'll be a catalytic event in their life and that will cause them to flip. But I at least in the examples I can think about, there tends to be some kind of a turning point that they hit that sort
Often,
of
yes.
wakes
Not
them up, as
always.
opposed to a slow journey. It's more of a like light bulb goes on as a result of something, right? And I guess from the marketer's perspective and the marketer thinking through their messaging, if they can be that epiphany creating message, right?
Exactly.
Then they've really done their job, right? If they
And
can be that catalyst.
I think that was one of the things that led to Prius being so successful, is
Right.
that they were pretty good at that.
Mm-hmm.
And Volkswagen, I remember the old Volkswagen ads of the 60s. Very simple ads, a lot of blank space, not much copy. And the message is basically Apple stole it and did think different, but it's basically a car doesn't have to be this galumphing 4-ton monstrosity.
Right.
Uh, and that was powerful and it worked.
So with regards to industry sectors that you think are most ripe for sort of revisiting this and sort of transforming themselves, are there any industries that you feel are sort of the next ones to sort of undergo the industry level, or category level epiphanies, right? Because you've talked about Walmart, obviously retail and grocery and all those things, and obviously automotive, it has had its own journey into sort of greenifying themselves, right? What do you think the next ones are in this sort of domino effect?
Well, food, transportation, construction, I think those are probably the three biggest ones. And of course, there are subsectors within each. The residential construction is really, really different from industrial or large commercial construction. I think large commercial construction is pretty much going to go away, actually, because between people buying online and people changing their work habits to work from home, there just isn't going to be the demand for the 50-story office towers that there used to be. And that's going to change things. But at the same time, I think because everybody's going online, a real experience has become very meaningful to people. It's something they don't get all the time. So they seek them out. So a lot of the sectors I mentioned are very ripe for ecotourism. The reason I know so much about Amory Lovins' house is that I visited it when I was in that area in Aspen. I took a tour. So that's one way you can really, people want to see this. I mean, I have toured eco villages in all sorts of places, including in Wales. And that was, my goodness, that was 1991. And there was already tourism around eco stuff in 1991 in the backcountry in Wales.
Cool. So, yeah.
And
so are you focusing your efforts in any of those particular categories from your practice?
I keep trying to figure that out, and it's really what comes my way. So like I've worked recently with the developer of a cell phone sized solar lamp that has many, many applications, ranging from disaster relief to children's night lights. I have worked with some food businesses. I love working for food businesses. And I think around here, I'm in Western Massachusetts, about 150 miles northeast of New York, Amherst, Northampton area. And I find that there is huge awareness of local farms being often superior in many ways. When I did that book, I talked to a group called CISA. The A is Citizens Involved in Sustaining Agriculture, I think it is. And they can take a lot of the credit, I think, for the awareness around here, because they've been working for 25 or 30 years to really build that awareness. And you find that no matter liberal or conservative, people agree on preserving open space, supporting local farms. It's a wonderful climate to be in that way. And I think the number of farmers markets locally had, when I did that book, it had something like tripled in 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
So you're seeing that. You're seeing much more awareness in the restaurant portion of the food sector of farm to table, local beer brewing, all that sort of stuff. So I think that the consciousness is beginning to seep in, just like yogurt in the 70s and tofu in the 80s slowly became more mainstream. I remember when yogurt was something weird that only people in the Greek neighborhoods had.
Right. Yeah. Interesting point. Yeah, I guess certain products hit tipping points. I think solar perhaps has sort of reached a tipping point due to the price points of the
Yeah, it's now cheaper.
cells and
The price of solar has gone while the price of fossil fuels continues to go kind of like this, but a steady upward trend if you look overall. And so why anybody would build a house right now that relies on fossil fuels is a question to me. I actually, with the farm that I live on, has a methane generation system. So they take the cow poop and they actually truck in food waste from restaurants. And with that, they generate hot water that heats 8 buildings on the farm, including mine. And my house is built in 1743, so that makes it one of the oldest green homes in the country. And they also power the grid with enough electricity to run something like 300 homes. And this is one dairy farm.
Yeah.
So you're seeing stuff like that. I think everywhere you look, there's so much innovation, Kevin. It's just amazing. I mean, I threw in some money for a Kickstarter that didn't make it for a Frisbee-sized, non-dam hydroelectric plant. Just stick it in the stream and it spins. How cool is that?
Yeah.
And I guess if it's the water isn't running, you can take it out and play Frisbee with it.
Cool. Well, this is all really fun stuff. I hope a lot of the folks watching and listening use this as a catalyst to sort of revisit their own businesses, revisit their own marketing plans.
Yeah. And there's lots of resources on my site at goingbeyondsustainability.com. There's a ton of stuff up there, including a bunch of free gifts and information on the 5-week course that I mentioned earlier, but also just some of the amazing innovation that's going on. It's just there for everywhere you look. There's people doing amazingly cool stuff that are really changing the way we think about every system.
Right. And I think the primary takeaway is really for the businesses that they shouldn't greenwash, right? They should make it a legitimate effort and, take advantage of the economies that where it's a win-win, right? It doesn't have to be a Band-Aid.
There's almost always low-hanging fruit where you save money by doing stuff or you make more money by doing these things. Right. And of course, you have to not make Marcal's mistake. You have to market it. Not telling people for 40 years is not a great way to take advantage of it.
Exactly.
And it's really a fun thing to do. And it's everywhere you look. There's ways that you can do it. And that's one of the things I do is individual consulting. I will work with a person or a business, say, okay, what is your specific piece of this that you are uniquely qualified to do that either nobody else is doing or nobody else is doing that's going to really be a competitor for you? And how can you really leverage that? And the answers are always very interesting. Again, that pizza shop that I invented the program for, which didn't even exist. It was just a hypothetical question. But I'm wired to see these connections, to see both the forest and the trees and come out with new ways to braid them together.
That's amazing. I'll certainly keep track of the things you're doing over, as your book comes out and as your courses continue to come out. Thanks so much for joining me.
Well, thank you. And I'm looking forward to doing this again sometime.
Sounds good.
Kevin Lee's Power Marketing is available on all your favorite podcast networks. Kevin loves helping businesses excel at marketing. Having marketing challenges? Just like Santa in the Miracle on 34th Street, if Kevin can't help you, he'll know someone who can. Find him on LinkedIn, subscribe, or follow.